of Technology. I'll be speaking to you today about the survey that I conducted of the extant literature regarding courts, judges in particular, how they ascend to the bench, and whether or not, in keeping with the theme of sustainability, whether or not judges possess the power to follow their preferences and actually create new policies advancing the agenda of environmental sustainability. But let me begin by saying, first, I deeply regret not being able to be with you this week for the conference. Due to unforeseen circumstances, I remain marooned in Vietnam. But I would like to thank Dr. Hoppos for extending me the kind invitation to deliver the keynote address. It is with profound honor and humility that I accept. Fortunately, I can't be there today, but hopefully instead of my personal presence, you'll accept this digital one in its stead. So I'd also like to thank, in addition to Dr. Hoppos, who is truly the inspiration behind your conference series. Without his ambition and motivation, certainly these conferences would never happen. Also, I'd like to thank Joni, who his immense logistical skill, unparalleled. Without his organizational ability, also I think these conferences wouldn't happen. So thank you to both of you for not only the invitation, but also putting these conferences together and allowing us this collegial conviviality. I think when I've attended these conferences in the past, I always marvel at the camaraderie that exists among participants. And in keeping with the spirit of that camaraderie, I know we always like to have a display of talent. Unfortunately, my talents don't extend too far beyond that of the academic. But today I'll be talking to you about a survey that I conducted of the scholarly literature that seeks to explore exactly how judges ascend to the bench, how they become judges, and how that ascension, how that elevation influences or informs their ability to create policy and to advance, essentially, the agenda, particularly regarding environmental sustainability. So you can read the abstract here. Basically what I've done is created a very comprehensive, exhaustive study of all of the scholarly literature. So this is basically a review of the literature regarding how judges ascend, how that ascension or elevation informs their policy-making decisions, whether or not judges can act as policymakers, or whether their behavior is confined or constrained by the method of their elevation, and how that contributes to their ability or inability to advance environmental sustainability. So why are judges important when discussing environmental sustainability? Sustainability is actually a relatively new concept. And in the judicial context, when we refer to sustainability, particularly economic sustainability, we're referring to the court's exercise of oversight over certain statutory and legislative regimes that are designed to preserve economic sustainability. Judges are absolutely critical. They have played over the course of several decades a really integral part in terms of the forefront of advancing sustainability initiatives. Judges adjudicate environmental sustainability legislation. In the United States, for example, we have the Clean Air and the Clean Water Act. This is legislation that was enacted by Congress. Judges and courts adjudicate and ascertain the constitutionality and the applicability. Essentially, these legislative enactments are enforced by the courts. Judges enforce environmental regulations, so legislative enactments, or what we refer to as enabling statutes, confer upon bureaucratic organizations such as the Environmental Protection Agency the ability to promulgate regulations related to keeping the air, keeping the water clean. So these administrative regimes are overseen by judges themselves and enforced. Judicial rulings, either related to legislation or regulations, create a legal precedent. This is the creation, in fact, of policy related to environmental sustainability. So again, Judges are absolutely critical in terms of creating and fomenting environmental sustainability causes. The method by which judges ascend to the bench in the States and really globally, there are two essential tracks we're talking about, the two processes by which judges are elevated to their positions of power. And this method of judicial selection is absolutely instrumental in forming and constraining judicial policymaking, judicial policy creation. There are essentially two different tracks. One is through appointment. Could be executive appointment. For example, the United States Supreme Court, justices of the Supreme Court are nominated by the executive, so nominated by the president, and then those nominations are considered through the advice and consent of the U.S. Senate. So judges who are appointed have a very different set of responsibilities and encumbrances compared to judges who are elected. So the opposites of judicial appointment is judicial election. There are judges who are elected by popular vote. So to a certain extent, the scholarly research strongly suggests that those who ascend to the bench through political appointment are more confined. Their positions on the bench are more politicized. They are beholden to their constituency. So if you are in a jurisdiction where the constituency is relatively conservative and is interested in promoting economic advances to the detriment of preserving the environment, judges are much more responsive and attuned to that political environment. We have a couple of different models that I discuss in my paper that are covered in the literature. The functionalist model requires courts to operate outside the influence of the electorate. So the functionalist model opines that the judges should be completely autonomous, be completely independent. Their ability to objectively apply the law is contingent upon their independence. They should not be beholden to anyone. They should be able to enforce, implement the law, irrespective of the political conditions. There is an opposing theory that holds that a politicized court is actually advantageous because politicized courts are more responsive to the political will. If there is a sea change, a shift, for example, in the United States during the 60s, with Brown versus Board of Education, there was a shift in terms of the civil rights movement, that politicized courts are much more inclined and attuned to these political shifts of the constituency's popular will. Both of these are somewhat operating at cross purposes. One believes judges should be independent and autonomous. The other, politicized judiciaries, are more responsive to the public at large. How do judges who are in a position of adjudicating these disputes, who are in a position of supporting or not supporting initiatives, legislation, regulations that create environmental sustainability, how do they make these decisions? Well, judges primarily act, as many of us do. They act in a way to preserve their own power, to preserve their own jobs. These judges are interested in creating some long-term longevity in terms of their appointment or their elected judgeship. Elected judges, according to the literature, conform to a majority opinion. So again, this kind of reinforces what we were discussing a moment ago, that elected judges are more sensitive to the whims and the vagaries of public opinion, less inclined to rule controversially. These are judges who want to maintain some consistency, who are not interested in rocking the boat, basically. Appointed judges are unconstrained. So again, in keeping with this theoretical theme, judges who have received an appointment, and generally these appointments vary by jurisdiction in terms of the length of the appointment. Supreme Court judges are appointed for life. With a life term appointment, you will not be as disinclined, as inhibited to rule controversially, to rule to issue or to render judgments that are more in line and in keeping with your own personal preferences, that are in keeping with the law. Basically, there is little recourse. The consequences are minimized. They're diminished if you're appointed, because you are operating outside of the parameters of public influence. Courts do tend to follow the elected, and what that means is, for example, the executive, the president, who can be at the forefront of advancing environmental legislation. Courts tend to follow the political power, the political parties rather, that hold power, that hold office. For example, Richard Nixon, who was very famously a conservative Republican president in the United States, in fact, started the Environmental Protection Agency. But he was an executive who, although he advanced the cause of environmental sustainability, himself was not an environmentalist. In fact, he's very famous in the White House for his love of the fireplace in the Oval Office. He used to turn up the air conditioning to freezing, so it would be comfortable enough in the Oval Office to light a fire in the fireplace. Now, certainly this is, by any stretch or any definition, not an environmentally sustainable practice. However, when elected, he knew he had a popular mandate to influence the creation of legislation that would promote long-term environmental sustainability. Courts largely followed his lead. The Clean Air and the Clean Water Act, which was passed in the 70s, was largely at the behest of Nixon. So courts tend to follow the person who is in the Oval Office. But these environmental initiatives, whether they come from the executive, the legislative, or the judicial branch, these are not confined to the United States. Certainly, the United States, in fact, it could be argued, has lagged behind other countries. When we think about courts across the globe and how they have been promoting an agenda that advances the interests of environmental and ecological sustainability, there have been many courts that have been incredibly proactive in establishing these new sustainability regimes. There are 360 environmental specialist courts around the globe that are interested in 42 countries, that are interested in instituting and enforcing environmental sustainability practices. And a couple of examples that I'd like to leave you with, that I would like to discuss. In South America, Brazil, the Brazilian judiciary has really been incredibly innovative in designing and developing remedies to promote economic and rather environmental sustainability. There are several trial-level judges who have been endowed with the authority to really create, again, innovative remedies. For example, there are a number of courts in trial-level jurisdictions where judges have established a kind of de facto informal environmental night school in which environmental offenders are sentenced so they can become more informed, more educated about the impacts and the consequences of their environmental offenses and infractions. Some of the remedies that have been established relating to the Brazilian Amazon, those who, for example, are convicted of poaching wildlife on Brazilian Amazonian wildlife preserves, have been sentenced to work in the wildlife preserve. Convicted criminals who have been convicted of offenses related to littering are ordered to pick up trash. Those who were convicted of offenses related to the unauthorized clear-cutting of old-growth forests have been required by the court to replant trees. So there are a lot of innovative solutions that judges have been employing to not only inform the public and inform those people who violate environmental sustainability laws, but also to remedy this problem, planting new trees, cleaning up the environment. The Indian Supreme Court has been, again, at the forefront in terms of environmental sustainability. Karnataka, really an unconscionable degradation of the Indian environment, prompted a justice of the Indian Supreme Court, Justice Alam, who very vociferously and adamantly declared that the Constitution, the Indian Constitution, provides an inalienable right that is conferred upon all Indian citizens. It grants them inviolable rights to a clean environment. This is unprecedented. the Indian Supreme Court in conferring a constitutional right under the 21st Amendment to the Indian Constitution, conferring a right to all Indian citizens of a clean environment. Again, this is at the forefront. The Aarhus Convention, this is in the European Union. This is basically a conglomeration of 45 European countries that have established a binding legal framework for protecting and preserving the environment. Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, once remarked that the Aarhus Convention was the first environmental democracy. So this Aarhus Convention establishes really a collegial collective among European nations to enforce and to inform citizens about environmental sustainability practices. So in conclusion, environmental sustainability laws must be implemented by judges, by courts and judges who are well informed about sustainability issues, who are motivated, who hold the power to enforce these legislative or regulatory edicts, and providing accessible justice to all individuals. As part of this increasingly globalized network, what we do to our own environments at home will resonate throughout the globe. So we have to be cognizant that we are global citizens now, and that we have a responsibility to all citizens and to future generations to embrace policies of economic and environmental sustainability, and I believe the two of these are mutually inclusive. So I want to thank you. Unfortunately, I'm not here to answer any of your questions, but I want to thank you for your time today, giving me a few minutes of your time. I wish I was there to hear all of your great presentations, but I make this commitment to you now that I will see you in South Korea. I'm looking forward to the next conference, and again, thank you so much. Enjoy the conference.